Hello everyone, I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, Learn, Test and Implement Your Path to Quantum Readiness. We launched PQC Labs recently, an industry's first sandbox for testing post-quantum cryptography, and we're here today to show you why that's such an important milestone. And for this, I have Jason Sirocco and Henry Lam here today for you. As always, this presentation is being recorded and we'll share it with you afterwards, most likely tomorrow. Finally, if you've got any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the chat function and answer as many as we can at the end. Jason and Henry, handing over to you.
Thank you, Lee. All right, folks, this is some really interesting announcements here from Sectigo. For the longest time, we've been talking about how to get your hands dirty with regards to post-quantum cryptography, and I think we finally have it here. So we're going to talk about basically what is going on in cryptography and the deprecation of the current cryptographic standards with respect to RSA and ECC. We're going to talk about how to get ready in the second part of the agenda, how to think about a preparedness plan, and then, of course, we're going to introduce Sectigo's PQC Labs, which is hopefully the reason why everybody's here. Next slide, Lee. So, for those of you who have been paying attention, this might be just review, but I'm finding that a lot of people right now, this is news. And no less than all of your data in transit encryption that happens within your organization is in threat right now of being deprecated by 2030. In other words, the underlying cryptographic algorithms that we really haven't thought about for the past 25 to 30 years is probably going to have to change. And most of us just do not have that capability of being agile in a cryptographic sense. So, quote from Gartner very recently, by 2029, advances in quantum computing will make conventional asymmetric cryptography unsafe to use. You might have, at the end of 2024, early 2025, heard about Google's Willow chip. You might have very recently, just last week, heard about Microsoft's brand new quantum capable CPU. A lot of these things, I don't think at this point in the early 2025 might be considered useful quantum computers. But the point being is that by the 2030 timeframe, quantum computers will be sufficiently capable to render current cryptographic algorithms deprecated. And that's huge news for all of us. 2030 might seem like a little ways off, but I think it's going to take time. It's going to take this amount of time between now and then to prepare. Thanks. Next slide, Lee. So what is going on right now as an industry is those of you who have been paying attention might have heard that NIST, the big standards body out of the US, has finally released a set of cryptographic algorithms that have gone to standards and have actually had the standards develop. In other words, we now have working standards documents for 3 and pretty soon up to 4 cryptographic algorithms for the purposes of signatures and key encapsulation. And that's terrific because that really was the first step. We couldn't do much without NIST having dropped those standards, which is great. So what happens now is that these standards will now be worked on by the IETF, another standards body, who will come up with standards for things such as the TLS handshake. In other words, where these certificates are used for the purposes of encrypting data in transit between a web server and web browser, and various forms of other types of problems that are posed by the large signatures that are being used within these new standards. And so therefore, I think we've entered the second phase of how these algorithms are going to be changing and how the all the other standards that are uh, surrounding this environment will be changing. And so once these are released by the IETF, slowly we will also start to see things such as the CAB Forum and Etsy also update their requirements and rules. So therefore, the entire landscape, all the way from the base cryptographic algorithms themselves to how we will all be using these new standards, will be defined. So therefore, what we're seeing right now in the industry is everybody, including Sectigo, watching and participating very intensively within this process. But I think we've now entered the second phase. Any comments on that, Henry?
No, well, yes and no. Yes, in a sense that we are intently watching what's happening in the industry simply because we as an organization know this is coming down very quickly. Even though it's 5 years away, 5 years is pretty quick. So it's something that we are very, very aware of, very adamant of making sure that whatever is standardized that we adopt as quickly as we can. Um, from cab forum will adopt it from a public side, and then for us as an organization we want to adopt it to then provide the ability for our end customers to utilize this for more future use cases.
Thanks, Henry. I think that, in the early part of this deck, one of the things that I would like to mention, because I do get the question, is does this affect all forms of encryption? And I would say that for those of you who are thinking about data encryption for data that is at rest, things that will use algorithms such as AES 256, etc., those algorithms are already post-quantum capable and essentially quantum resistant to some sense because of the fact that they're not based off of a factorization methodology in terms of how to unravel them. Uh, I think that you're safe with those. So, what to prioritize in your inventory taking of cryptographic assets when you're thinking through this problem is mostly encryption of data in transit. We will also end up talking about signing, and we will also talk about authentication. But I think that those types of activities that PKI is a big part of, I think that those types of activities will probably come later in our discussions. But encryption of data in transit is where RSA and ECC are used the most right now and probably are at the most risk in a shorter time frame. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about some of the threats that are being faced. And some of these threats are not, you're not waiting till 2030 for these threats to become real. I would say that on this list, the harvest now and decrypt later problem is one of the most real problems there is. And that is, you probably have heard of this, but those of you who haven't, if there's an adversary that's within your network, and I think all of us from a zero trust uh, principles standpoint need to assume this, that your adversary is already recording packets going across your network. And whether that's an internal a network for an organization, or whether it's a network from communication going from your computers to, say, the cloud, a cloud network, it doesn't really matter. There's so many ways for an adversary to record data that's going across. And you might say to me, that's fine. I'm going across a TLS session. The data is encrypted in transit. Well, take a look at that traffic and realize that probably it is being encrypted somehow with keys that are generated based off of a process involving these cryptographic algorithms, ECC and RSA, that are most at risk. So the decrypt later part of the problem is that at some point in the future, your adversary will be decrypting these recorded sessions. So for those of you who are thinking about this problem, you might think to yourself, well, there's a lot of transactional data going across this type of traffic. It's not really a problem for me. I think what you really need to realize is that there probably is a smaller percentage of the traffic going across that wire that you wouldn't want to be decrypted in a future sense, and that is PII data, that is any kind of intellectual property data that's going across. And I think that those of you who are in regulated industries really do need to think about this very carefully. And so, therefore, I think that that is the reason why you want to start getting ready for this in a sense sooner than later. And so, from a public trust standpoint, that's your web servers going off to browsers. I think that we talked just a few slides ago about Cab Forum and other organizations that Sectigo is involved with that will come up with the standards in time. But I think that for the most part, what we are most interested in right now, all of us, including Sectigo, is about getting our private trust scenarios locked down sooner than later. In other words, private certificate authorities that are issuing certificates for data encryption in transit, for signing, for purposes such as authentication, which is probably the biggest private use case. Those are things that we need to start looking at sooner than later due to the threats that are listed here. Of course, the issue is, there's going to be a lot of effort in doing this. I would say that being able to address these risks is something that is really important and the reason why we have released PQC Labs. Next slide, Lee. So let's talk about this deprecation of RSA and ECC. There was a draft document. I think it is just exiting draft this month. And this document titled Transition to Postquantum Cryptography Standards, which is an information release 8547. I think that even if you were to download that document and read it, it is a little bit difficult to interpret. So let me interpret it for you. The most widely used cryptographic standards right now, cryptographic algorithms for data encryption in transit especially, is RSA 2048 and ECC 256. In the case of RSA 2048, that is a cryptographic algorithm that we've been using for probably 3 decades now, and it is utterly ubiquitous. It came as a great shock to the industry that NIST did not wait for some sort of a panic moment with regards to quantum computing, and it will be deprecated within the 2030 timeframe and then completely allowed by 2035. So let me put this into really plain language. You all have systems right now that are running these cryptographic algorithms. And therefore, if nothing were to be done, you would be using operational systems that would be insecure with deprecated algorithms past 2030. And therefore, the preparation for this needs to start sooner than later. And that is really why Sectigo is trying to help our customers to prepare for this. We do have precedents for cryptographic algorithm and cryptographic primitive deprecation, and some of you might remember the deprecation of the hashing algorithm SHA-1. And it was successfully deprecated. The problem is that the SHA-1 algorithm was still in use years after it was deprecated, which is not a good thing. In other words, there were digital certificates that were hashed with SHA-1 that were in circulation and still being issued, even probably still to this day, but there were still quite a few, even just a few years ago, well past its deprecation date. And it was an example of a failure within the industry that we do not want to repeat with this much larger deprecation of RSA and ECC. Henry, I'm going to let you give a chance to comment here.
I was going to add a comment just to add to your point. Even though SHA-1 is still floating around, don't think about public certs. Think about private. there are customers out there are still using SHA-1 RSA 1024 in their environment, and that's been broken years ago, and they're still floating around. NIST is putting out something for RSA 2048 to be deprecated in 2030. And by the way, by that time, RSA 2048 would have been in the industry for at least minimum 25 years. It has been recommended to make that change since 2013 after RSA 1024 is broken. So what they're doing is what Jason says. They're getting ahead of the game simply because computational power is growing. Even in current days, RSA 2048 is going to reach, sorry, it's going to reach a point where our current computational capabilities will affect RSA 2048. They're just trying to, NIST is just trying to tell you, hey, do this now, even for today, before quantum computer comes, because once it comes, it's just a speed bump.
Thanks so much for that, Henry. I think the final note before we change the slide is everybody listening to this webinar and all your friends and your dogs and your cats all are using these cryptographic algorithms for something. In fact, probably for a lot of things. They are utterly ubiquitous, and that's why we're trying to get the word out as soon as possible. Thank you, Lee. Next slide. All right, let's talk about some of these new post-quantum algorithms. And there has been a release. In fact, for the longest time, we were waiting for NIST to release these standards after a very long and lengthy choice process of actually choosing the best of the algorithms that were in competition with each other. And RSA, of course, is based off of the difficulty for traditional computers to solve large prime numbers or find them. And our ECC is based off of the factorization difficulty in finding 2 points on a specific elliptic curve. But we need entirely new math that's not based on factorization. And when we say here that 2 of these algorithms are lattice-based, whenever you see ML in this uh, new naming scheme, it means module lattice. And so we actually have talked quite a bit about lattice-based mathematics within the podcast that Tim Callan and I do. But this is part of why there's a great hope and that we can continue on in our digital lives using cryptographic algorithms that are resistant to quantum computers. In other words, as potentially powerful as quantum computers are, thankfully, NIST and all the great academics behind the process have started to develop these types of cryptographic algorithms. So when you're talking about things like module lattice chem, I love these naming standards now from NIST because it really gets to the heart of how these cryptographic algorithms actually work and what they do for you. Whenever you see ML, it's module lattice. That actually gives you the basis of mathematics behind the cryptographic algorithm. And then when you're talking about chem, you're talking about key encapsulation methods and other forms of basically the naming standards for these new cryptographic algorithms tell you a lot about the underlying math and what the actual usage for these uh, algorithms are, whether it's key encapsulation or whether it's digital signature algorithms. And of course, along with the NIST standardization came the new FIPS authorizations for each of these. And so these have both a NIST name as well as a FIPS name. And that's why you see MLChem is FIPS 203. And the previous names for these being crystals dilithium and crystals kyber. Some of you may have heard those names in the past. All of those got renamed to this new NIST naming standard, which I actually like what they did here. So the reason why we have this slide is for those of you who are very interested in actually working with the new cryptographic algorithms, these are the ones that are most interesting. And Henry, maybe just a quick comment for you about MLDSA. I think you've got some experience with it now because it's going to be part of our announcement with Sectigo PQC Labs.
Yeah, so what our PQC lab primarily will do MLDSA, which is more of just a digital signature capability. It is something that was the most mostly widely used because current technology today, for the most part, sign something or authenticate something. So that's why we chose that specific um, algorithm to utilize within our platform itself.
It makes a lot of sense, Henry, because if you think about the role of a certificate authority is typically signing new CSR requests. And so therefore, that's a really good example of a digital signature algorithm that is being needed, and therefore MLDSA was the right place to start. Now you might be asking, why is that interesting and why do I need to get my hands dirty with it? And I think the answer is this. The signatures on these new cryptographic algorithms are 4 to 5 times larger than they were with RSA and ECC, meaning how you handle them is going to be different in the future. And therefore, it's really good to start to know more about these algorithms. We've been so spoiled for so long to not have to think much about RSA and ECC, but I think we're going to have to start to think more about our cryptographic algorithms in the future. Thanks, Lee. Next slide. All right, let's talk about the pillars of getting ready, because that's really what this is. And education number one, this is why we're doing this webinar. It's basically to start to make more and more awareness that there needs to be a readiness type of mindset within basically anybody right now who has a computer of any kind needs to start thinking about this. And I would say that organizations that have any kind of security program, it doesn't matter if you're government, it doesn't matter if you're in any kind of commercial industry, this does affect you. But it especially affects you if you're within a regulated industry right now that is starting to think about these problems. So that's part of the education, is understanding the context of yourself and your organization within the risks that you face. And so I would say that equipping your technical professionals with knowledge about post-quantum cryptography is number one. Understanding just what MLDSA is, I think, is part of what you want to start to be doing, even before you get your hands dirty with touching these things. But I would say that understanding the new standards from NIST, understanding the what is going on with IETF, those are for those of you who want to be in the weeds and understand. But I would say that for those of you who are beginning your education, starting to think about the inventory of your systems and bringing together the various stakeholders within your organization is what's going to enable you to uh, get the investments that are necessary to be ready for that 2030 timeframe. Education, the first pillar. The next slide, Lee. And so let's talk about then the next thing that you need to be thinking about, which is, uh, one of the oldest adages there is in public key infrastructure, PKI, is that you never roll your own cryptography. And therefore, that is incredibly true, maybe more true than ever. In other words, building post-quantum systems where legacy systems once were is something that you're going to need to talk to your vendors about. And that includes everything from your HSM hardware vendors, people who are supplying your laptops, the various software that you procure. This understanding what the whole industry is doing right now is going to be part of your transition. Understanding the regulatory bodies that you are under and understanding what their requirements for post quantum are. I would say, Henry, maybe a comment for you about this, but the White House right now, if you're involved at all in selling to the US federal government, they have changed. There was a White House executive order as of December 2024 that is of great interest to all of you who are either a vendor into this ecosystem or consuming data from this system, where post-quantum systems will be necessary for all net new systems bought by the federal government within 2025. And that time frame is something that I think that you guys need to start understanding, because it's going to affect the entire industry, whether you're involved with the federal government or not. Any comments on this pillar, Henry?
I think it's a very good thing that's been done, simply because history has shown us as we tend to don't want to have that type of change, and we end up creating issues for ourselves because we sometimes forget or turn a blind eye to it. So this initiative does help a lot to push uh, the whole thing forward for cryptography for the future, so that we don't run into, again, future issues where we have another scenario where another SHA-1 occurs or another RSA occurs. So therefore, they are asking vendors dealing with the government to be prepared for this. It's not a bad thing, because sometimes change is hard, but change is needed, and the government is trying to look out for the vendors that they interact with, along with making sure that they're secured with the government itself. So it is a very, very good thing. If this didn't happen, unforeseen issues could arise that we wouldn't even fathom at this moment in time, until quantum computers or some sort of system that could break these keys.
Thanks, Henry. I think that before we leave this slide, I'll just make the final comment. I would say that the second pillar of post-quantum readiness really is all about accepting the fact that no one organization and no one vendor has the complete solution and probably never will. This is going to require all of us to come together, and that's what we mean by support. Next slide, Lee. Okay, so let's talk about a blueprint for how to think about this. And I'll start with the first one, Henry, the Q, which is like in all good security endeavors. I think what you need to start thinking about is taking inventory of your cryptographic assets. And that is really important with respect to understanding where you are using RSA, where you are using ECC, and it's not just about your publicly trusted certificates. As Henry reminded you, from a private trust standpoint, you have a whole lot of systems that are actually using these cryptographic standards, and you need to have a full inventory of where these things are. Uh, Henry, any comments about that, or how to actually do this kind of asset inventory taking with respect to tools such as discovery?
There's actually two parts to that. So one is from a key exposure in certificates. That's one area. The other part is also that also helps you when you do a discovery of that side, is inventory of the actual, to your point, the asset itself. Because finding the cert is great to have the exposure. Not knowing what system is on is another problem you have to deal with. So I would say that this helps to be able to at least do one part. It leads you to the other part, which quite honestly could be a different area that as an organization may need to address holistically. A cert is one portion of that is living in another type of asset.
So it's not just about keys, it's not just about certificates, it's about the systems that are consuming them, the contexts in which they are running, and the
Mm-hmm.
ownership as part of that context. All of these things should be part of your inventory. Thank you for that, Henry.
No problem. I guess I'll take this one, which leads to this part: uncover the risk. Um, Think of it this way: back to the discovery of the keys in the cryptographic asset. Once you have it, you need to know what's the underlying technology, as we said before. For all you know, that certificate could be on a mainframe. It could be on, I don't know, a legacy ERP system that's been around for 30 years. And then you have to then tag them of what is the risk level? Are there vulnerabilities in that system by default? Not default. Are there any additional vulnerabilities? Because those systems have been around for 20, 30, 40 years. How do you make sure that you protect against them beyond just a cert, right? You got to protect the system itself, because the first line of defense, you have to proactively prevent any type of zero-day attack, buffer overflow, any social engineering, and then on top of that, the keys come into play as well, from a risk perspective and an assessment perspective. Jason, any
Okay.
comments from yourself on this one?
No, that's it. Let's next slide, Lee. And so just a couple words here about once you have done that hard work with respect to taking your inventory, understanding all your contexts, and putting it within a vulnerability context, then it's time to start to analyze and strategize what you're going to do. In other words, I like this third bullet point. Let's talk about this. You will have, as part of your inventory, taken note of the fact that you will have legacy systems that will be living past 2030. And you will have plans to go to net new systems in the 2030 timeframe and beyond. For some of those legacy systems, a hybrid approach may be interesting to you. In other words, using certificates, digital certificates, X509 type of format, same old format that you've been using for 30 years, but using them with multiple cryptographic algorithms. In other words, algorithms that are exposed to your legacy systems with legacy cryptographic algorithms that it knows how to deal with, but also at the same time protected with post-quantum algorithms known as hybrid certificates. And so therefore, why would you use that? When would you not want to use that? This is all part of the assessment that is based off of your current and future strategy for your systems. I'm sure you have some comments about this, Henry.
Um, I do. The biggest thing is you have to prepare for this.
Yeah.
um, Beyond that point, I think anything else, it's just additional words, we'll say.
I would say, Henry, the one thing that I would like to add to this, and we probably need to add a bullet point to this slide, is don't think about your strategy as just having expenses related to swapping out like systems for like systems, non-post quantum to post quantum. I think that there are big opportunities if you're going to be doing this kind of work. The ways in which you built your cryptographic systems that consume cryptographic algorithms in the past is not the way you're probably going to want to build them in the future. And so, therefore, there's a huge opportunity for innovation in the ways in which that you build your systems, make them less fragile, make them more efficient, make them more integrated. I think that the siloed past needs to change, and that is a big positive aspect to if you're going to do this work, you will end up with better systems in the future, not just the same systems with different algorithms. Thanks, Lee. Next slide.
And
All right, and yeah, Henry, I'll let you take this one.
I was gonna do lead, I could just chime, but okay, I could do the lead. So once you have that strategy, you're able to discover, you put your assessment, your priorities, and your strategy together. It's implementation. One of the big thing is how do you work from a certificate perspective? Do you have a solution in place today for to at least manage your certificate from a certificate lifecycle management perspective? Because if that's not there, guess what? You have blind spots that you don't know of. So therefore, that needs to be part of your implementation plan moving forward, at least for a post-quantum preparedness. The other part to look into is then beyond that point, how do you then address certificates that are issued beyond, let's say 10, 20, 50, 1,000, 10,000? Do you want humans to do it? Are you able to tackle all of them in a short period of time? Then you need to potentially look at implementing automation, which tags onto another piece, which I'll cover a little bit later. But automation helps you do things without needing an army of people to do it. At the same time, it allows you to automate certificates en masse to then be able to change, which effectively allows you to have crypto agility. Because look at it as what Jason mentioned before, RSA and ECC, at least from an RSA 2048 and ECC 256 would be deprecated, or NIST recommends deprecation by 2030. If you have automation in place, and let's just say January 1st, 2031 came about and you need to switch and you have automation, you're able to, from a pure crypto agility, to move to a higher key strength. And by that time, if when post quantum keys are in certificates, you're able to swap them quickly because you have the automation, which allows you to have crypto agility and then certificate agility as well. This also plays into the other areas of integration because beyond what automation could do, you could have integrations that you custom build or third party into you, which then also has that automation capability to quickly issue new certs and swap them out as needed from an implementation. So therefore, it is one additional issue or blind spots that you don't have to worry about. And then on top of that, as Jason mentioned before, if you're in a regulated industry, you have compliance. You have to meet them. And this at least allows you to move to satisfy criteria from compliances, whether it is a GDPR and PCI DSS, HIPAA compliancy, or any other compliance regulation that you may have to follow based on your industry. Jason, anything I'm missing
Thank you
here?
so much. No, that's perfect, Henry. Next slide, Lee. Go ahead, Henry.
Oh, I was going to say, beyond to one of the things that Jason mentioned from the strategy side, it's not a one and done. You have to keep doing this because guess what? Technology has advanced so quickly over the last 15, 20 years, and it's going to accelerate even quicker. So even though if you do an implementation plan, great, you're done. What are you doing to ensure that you are keeping up with this regularly and monitoring it? Which goes back to all the way back to what we talked about from a quantum exposure and inventory. Because once everything is implemented, you need to go all the way back to the beginning, do the whole discovery, do the re-asset again, and then to make sure that you don't have any blind spots and you don't have anybody doing something within an organization that may not meet your strategy or your compliancy or because someone think they know better. So this has to be then part of your entire life cycle to make sure that you have something available. You may not run this every 3 months. You may run this annually, but at least you have to keep this in mind, or else you could create problems down the road because you think, oh, I implemented, I'm good to go. That's not the case. You have to keep at this everything you do. If you don't, you will basically create side effects and issues down the road that you say, oh, I did not know because I did not run this plan continuously.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. I think this sort of holistic thinking is what's absolutely going to be necessary here. It's not a one and done exercise. But like I said before, I think that from an innovation standpoint, that is this will pay big dividends to how your system, how efficient they are, how agile they are, your ability to make wide scale changes at a moment's notice. That's the future we're going to have, and it's going to be a better future than the reality that we've been living in for for the past couple decades. Next slide, Lee. Henry, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right. So we did launch our PQC lab, which is the first sandbox environment to allow you to fully utilize the actual standards that NIST drafted. In this case, FIPS 204, which is MLDSA, for you to be able to issue a certificate to then allow you to look at it from a quant readiness strategy perspective and to basically to generate it and play with it as you see fit, simply because a lot of people out there saying we want to be quantum ready, we want to be quantum ready, but don't know what it looks like. So this sandbox allows you to create that given post quantum key to be in a certificate and just play around with it. Next slide, please. So key features. Um, you can generate a PQC key in a certificate. On top of it, the CAs that we sign that certificate with is using a PQC key as well. So therefore, you have the full PQC key in the certificate chain as well as in the leaf certificate that you have. Second, it is in a sandbox environment. It is fully for testing. It allows you to generate it. It allows you to look at it. Allows you to play with it, and then we also have different assets available in the platform for you to look at and to read up on it and to listen to various recordings we have. Podcasts created by our esteemed colleague Jason Sirocco and Tim Callan for you to at least understand what it would look like from a PQC key inside a PKI infrastructure and what it really entails. Next slide, please. So how do we achieve this? We partnered with a company called Crypto4A, which creates quantum-ready HSMs. So there, from that perspective, we have married our sandbox environment with Crypto4A's HSM to then be able to deliver post-quantum private CAs that could create post-quantum certificates that is fully secure and actually certified. So therefore, it is not a variation of a key that could have been prior to the NIST standard. So this is all validated, all certified, and in the sandbox environment for a customer or a prospect or an end user to utilize. So how does it look like? We do have the sandbox environment. It is publicly available. We can provide the link for you to go to look at it. And if you want to have a conversation after, we can do that as well. But ultimately, we give you a landing page. You sign up, you get a landing page, and you get into the platform. And effectively, it's very simple. We allow you to come in here to then enter a common name of given certificate. It shows you in the screenshot, and I believe it's a little small unless you have a really big 2K monitor. Oh, perfect. You moved to the next slide. It allows you to enter a common name. It tells you this. It's an MLDSA key that we're using. It's a 30-day certificate. And all you do is you click generate. Next slide. And it's that simple. Once it's generated, you have the ability to inspect the certificate that's actually inside this page right here. There's a drop-down menu to see that the certificate that's generated and the CA chain that's above it, and you can select different CA chains accordingly. See the name of it, the subject, the hashing algorithms, the serial number. Move on to the next slide. On top of it, beyond just viewing it, we allow you the ability to download it effectively to, one, inspect the certificate. As Jason mentioned, the keys are huge. They're big. They're 4 to 5 times larger than the current RSA 2048 keys we have today. So therefore, from a system itself, when you download it and inspect it, the key is very, very big. But at least it allows you to take it inside your environment and actually view the whole certificate in a raw format if you wanted to. That's one. Second, we also allow you to do it from a certificate and certificate chain. So therefore, if you want to inspect the cert and all the chains itself, we allow you to do that as well. And finally, if you really, really want to play with it in your test environment, actually, Leah, if you want to back up one slide, the last option, we then allow you to export the certificate chain, and the private key to the MLDSA key to play around within your environment so that at least you can put it onto a test environment and see what it looks like and see how it actually potentially would work. Just to kind of put a caveat, some systems, probably most systems today, don't support the keys because the standard isn't there, but at least it shows you what it could look like if you do install it into a web application to then utilize inside your environment. Any comments from yourself, Jason?
Henry, I just wanted to thank you so much for releasing this. And the comment really want to make here is that I'm sure a lot of you watching this have a lot of questions and want to see not just screenshots of this, but want to see it in action. I fully invite you to get a hold of us because we have a big mandate to get this into the hands of customers and show them the beginnings and building blocks of what will become much larger productized PQC systems that Henry will be announcing down the road.
Awesome. And then the last thing within the actual Sectigo PQC labs, we give you resources, a lot of resources. And this is just a small bit of it. We have way more resources. And the thing is that we don't want to overload you, but we wanted to give you snippets of details on how to get general information about our labs, the vendor crypto foray that we utilize for the HSMs as a partnership to fulfill this or to launch this labs to the general audience. And then we provide podcasts that's been talked about over, Jason, would you say 2 years, 3 years or so?
Tim Callan and I have been talking about post-quantum cryptography since 2019. So we're dealing now with getting to 6 years.
Yeah. All right. So 6 years. I apologize, but we give you some high level, some different podcasts that was highlighted around post quantum, and as Jason talked about, there's 6 years worth of podcasts, and a lot of them are related to post quantum. So again, we provide you the highlights, but there is a lot more to listen to if you want to actually listen. And then on top of that, we provide blog posts, ebooks along the way for you to educate yourself so you understand what is happening, why we released it, and what's potentially and what will be coming down the road when a PQC key becomes a standard in a certificate. Next slide. Back to you, Mr. Jason.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, Henry did a great job of plugging the podcast. We want to do it one last time, which is if you have any sort of interest within digital certificates, digital identities, any sort of interest in cryptography, certainly if you signed up for this webinar and are interested in post-quantum cryptography specifically, Tim Callan and I have a podcast called Root Causes, and it is available anywhere where you get your podcasts. And in fact, Lee, I think we've even got to add YouTube to this list as well, because now Tim and I are moving towards every one of our podcasts being a video podcast. So that's one of our latest developments. Anyway, thank you so much for that. And Lee, I think you might take it from here.
Yeah, brilliant. And yes, we'll be adding YouTube to that list. We have a couple of questions. What first step do you recommend for preparing for PQC?
JJ, you want to take
Henry,
that?
yeah, I think that we did mention it, but it's worth talking about. I think that one of the things we didn't mention in this webinar, and it might be worth mentioning very quickly, is if you're an organization of any size, other than very small businesses, there's a concept out there called the Cryptographic Center of Excellence. And what it means is this: if you were to just envision in your own mind, where am I using RSA and ECC? If you're a technical person and you can envision that, well, you'll very quickly realize that it's used in so many parts of your organization that it's not something you can just kind of chuck over as a problem and take inventory with your IT department and let them take the entire problem alone. It's going to take uh, a number of people within your organization that are even more than just technical people. It's also going to involve stakeholders from your executive leadership team who understand risk. And I think that's where we get into the issue of how was the Y2K problem solved? And for those of you who remember that time, Y2K was solved because people in the organization came together and the problem wasn't just left to the technical people. So inventory taking includes less technical functions such as what is the inventory of risk? And then that can be coupled with the more technical information about, all right, here's all the different systems that are using these algorithms, and then what sorts of risk are they associated to? And I think within this webinar, Henry did a good job of helping us to understand the various forms of contexts in which you have to put in within your inventory. So it's not a simple exercise of just making a list and then checking the boxes. This really is a full understanding of what are the underlying algorithms that are in play, what are the systems, and then what are all the contexts around it, not the least of which is your risk. And I think that That's where you start any good security endeavor, but especially the PQC journey.
Great. A second question is, does the announcement of Microsoft Mojonaro 1 change the thinking about when PQC will happen?
That's a really good question. I think that with respect to Google's Willow chip and the latest announcement from latest announcement from Microsoft, these really amazing pieces of engineering that advance quantum computers, I think that these were already on the roadmaps of Google and Microsoft and IBM and others. So therefore, I don't think that these are shocking moments. We were expecting them. I think if they would not have been released, we would have started to doubt, geez, will we have usable quantum computers by 2030? I think that these announcements that you've been hearing about basically are validations that the 2030 timeframe for deprecation of RSA and ECC is holding firm. And in fact, it's holding more firm now than it has even in the past. So things are starting to shape up, and these announcements are important to help us to understand that these problems are, in fact, very real.
Cool. And then we've got one more. When do you think will the CAB Forum update their requirements for quantum certificates?
Henry, you want to take that one?
That's a very good question. I know to date, at least from an IETF standard perspective, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong. Last I saw, there was like 8 different drafts that's going on right
Yeah.
now.
Yep.
So Cab Forum is very much apparent, know about those drafts. And the one thing is, once one of those drafts becomes standard, they will start working on it. So to answer the question, really, there's not much their movement from their side because they aren't able to set a standard without having a standard in place, or else you could set the wrong precedence. So, but Cab Forum is aware of it. They know they need to do it. It's just a matter of when the first one gets ratified, and there will be a discussion around which standard to choose from a post quantum key and a certificate will be adopted. And then from there on, it will then be adopted by all CAs and all browsers out there to provide the functionality.
I just want to add to that real quickly. Things such as certificate profiles for publicly trusted certificates, those are all the kinds of things that will have to come out of CAB Forum. CAB Forum is really, their hands are tied until IETF makes a lot of decisions, just like Henry said. But I would say that everything above is really all about publicly trusted certificates. CAB Forum doesn't make rules for private systems.
Yes.
And I would say that private systems are the ones that you need to start looking at first due to the risk factors. So therefore, as interesting as Cab Forum is, and we will all of our eyes will be peeled on it, towards the end of this year and into 2026, because I think you'll start to see action. I would say that your interest should be in private certificate authorities and private systems sooner than later, even before Cab Forum.
Okay, we've just had one question come in. What is the biggest hurdle to implement quantum certificates in your opinion?
That's for you, Henry.
It's back to the standards. Once the standard's done, let me back up. Crypto agility. You want to do crypto agility first, meaning the ability to easily swap them out when quantum cert comes out. And then from that perspective, a standard needs to be selected. And then what Jason mentioned is private certs most likely will get adopted first because a vendor out there will create a solution that could issue privately trust certificate, and the vendor could be us, right? They could issue privately trusted certificates using a new standard, and then from there on, if you have crypto agility, and when we have it, if you utilize our solution, we can swap them out pretty quickly for you. Jason, anything to add?
I would say that cryptographic agility is something that we haven't had to think about for decades. RSA and ECC have been with us for so long that we've barely think about them. And Dr. Dustin Moody, who heads up NIST's PQC program, was on our podcast, the Root Causes podcast, and he said something very interesting, Henry, which was the era of not having to worry about being cryptographically agile is over because MLDSA, MLChem, and all of the other algorithms, you need to understand whether or not you're going to choose them for your private systems. And you may, at a moment's notice, have to change those algorithms down the road because there's less of a security assuredness to a lot of these brand spanking new algorithms. And we've already seen the proposed cryptographic algorithms such as SIKE, which is based on isogeny math. Those types of algorithms have already been taken down by white hat security researchers. Dr. Dustin Moody basically implied that we probably will see more of that down the road, and therefore our ability to be agile cryptographically is going to be critical. So I could not agree with you more, Henry.
Okay, great. I think that was all the questions. Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Jason and Henry. If you do have any more questions, we're here for you. Do get in touch with us. But yeah, for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.